Ray, I'd like you to tell us how this all began.
Yes, beginnings are so funny, aren't they? I started off, like so many young chaps in the music business, by playing what we used to call in the trade gigs. That is to say, you had a small band and you played dances everywhere from Regent Street to the suburbs. And on the side, I wrote tunes chiefly for my own amusement. I managed eventually to become an arranger. That is the business of just learning about music and how to write it for instruments. And I eventually got myself a job in a music publishing house as an arranger. And having been there for a while, I went to the BBC under Jack Payne, who was the house band leader of the old BBC, which of course was called 2LO in those days.
True.
And I was his arranger there. Only it was a rather curious thing that the old BBC was just off the Strand in Savoy Street. In front of it, of course, was the old Savoy Chapel. And I was a choir boy at that place when I was a youngster. So, of course, it was really looking back on my childhood right there, out of the windows, so to speak.
Now, Ray, this was the Jack Payne era, wasn't it?
Yes.
One of the songs that you wrote for Jack Payne, which became a world hit, called Love is the Sweetest Thing.
Actually, Jimmy, this number was written for a picture that Jack Payne was in. I wrote the whole score. I was very busy myself and didn't have time to go down to the studios. So they called me up and they said, well, we want one more song. We want a ballad. Can you get it by Thursday or something like that? And I said, yes, all right, Thursday. So I wrote Love is the Sweetest Thing and sent it down. There was dead silence for a week. And then somebody in the film end of it rang up and said, well, you'll be glad to hear that we recorded that ballad you sent down and it came out all right. I said, I'm glad of that. He said, you're a very clever guy. You're very smart. I said, why am I so smart? He said, well, you've stolen God Save the Queen.
I never thought of that.
Well, actually, if you look at the first 5 notes, they are almost God Save the Queen. Of course, the whole way they are put around is different, and it was quite unconscious on my part, but he thought I had stolen God Save the Queen.
And from Jack Payne, you moved as a staff arranger to this recording company.
Mm-hmm. An old friend of mine who was Carol Gibbons, the famous band leader from the Savoy Hotel, who was light music director of one of the recording companies. And he was going into fresh fields, and he said, would I like to take over his job, because he thought that anybody that he recommended the firm would accept. And I said, yes, I would like it. So I went to the recording company, and I took over accompanying various artists, and also the house band there, which at that time was called the New Mayfair Dance Orchestra.
I believe, as an orchestra leader, it all started from there, because you weren't recognized as an orchestra leader, you were recognized as an arranger. Is this true?
Just an arranger and conductor. That was my job. And, of course, the numbers that I recorded with the New Mayfair Dance Orchestra went out under that name. And after a while, I suggested to the firm that there would be better identification as far as the public was concerned if we put a name on it so that they could identify it, because otherwise it might be confused with a hotel or something like that, or even with another band leader.
Mm-hmm.
So they agreed to that. So from then on, the records went out as the Ray Noble Orchestra.
And you were playing what we call secondary tunes that other people refused. Is that true?
Well, it was rather natural, wasn't it? After all, it was only the house band.
Uh-huh.
Now, we had very well-known names like Bert Ambrose and Jack Hilton on our lists at the time. Naturally, they had the pick of the best tunes. Mm-hmm. And then we also had American records, which we had the right to reproduce if we so wished, and we would reproduce those, naturally, if they were good recordings. But now and then there would be the odd title which wasn't covered, which we thought the public would like to have. And this is where the house band came in. But, of course, I did get an awful lot of dogs. On the other hand,
you had a lot of hits.
Well, yes. For instance, there was one case in point. I rescued a great tune from oblivion. There was a show in New York in which the music was extremely good, but the show itself was a flop. The rest of the show was a flop, and it died very quickly on Broadway. And the publishers showed me the music, and they said, look, the show has died on Broadway, but the music is rather good. And I saw one of these songs, and I said, but this is a lovely tune. It shouldn't die. And I got an okay from the firm to record it. And it was a song called Time on My Hand, which is living now, and it's still a great song,
I agree, Ray. But another great song that you wrote way back in 1933 is also very much alive today and brought to life even more recently by Tony Bennett.
Oh, yes, yes. A good recording.
The very thought of you.
Yes. Different from Alboli's, but still an excellent recording. One of his best, I thought.
Now, Ray, getting back to the new Mayfair Dance Orchestra again, it was through your arrangements, because you weren't a recognized band leader, were you?
Oh, no, no.
It was through the arrangements that took you to America, because I believe it was a man called Don Rockwell that was raving about your arrangements and said, we must have this man in America, and you eventually went and opened a new place called the Rainbow Room or something.
Yes. Actually, it started when Tom Rockwell came to me in London, made a proposition, and of course I was under contract here. Also, there was another firm, MCA, who were interested. And I made an agreement with both these chaps. I went over to the States, and I took with me two fellows who I thought were rather essential to building a new orchestra in a strange country.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was Bill Harty, the drummer, and the other one was Al Bowley, the singer.
You must have run into an awful lot of problems working in New York.
Well, yes. I'd never been to the States myself. Bill Harty had, Al Bowley hadn't. But fortunately, we had good friends. The two Dorsey boys, for example, Tom Dorsey and Jim Dorsey, both of whom had their own bands. Not then, but later on. We'd met them in London. The picture in New York, as far as dance bands was concerned, was a little different from England. Curious enough, I found it in the details. Saxophone tone was different. The vibrato speed in saxophones was different.
Mm-hmm.
These were considerations which only affected the arranger. And I had the problem, of course, of making American musicians sound exactly like the English band. This was a problem, really, I never really sorted out. I did my best. And in those days, so many of our fans, shall we say, and when I say fans, this means not only youngsters, it means men of 40 and 50, wanted to hear the same arrangements that they'd heard in the records, and we had to do it. This meant that I had to get fellows to imitate the solos, the improvised solos that I'd already done on records. This was a little tough at times. I had to play some of the old records over, get it down absolutely as close as I could, let the chap who was going to play it hear it and say, this is what it's got to sound like. And he said, I don't play like that. I said, I know you don't, old chap, and it's tough on you. Can we change it a little bit and get as near as you can? And of course, if you have good men and you have competent musicians, they'll do it.
Speaking of competent men, I believe that you had the late Glenn Miller in your orchestra and also Charlie Spivak. Is that true?
Oh, yes, I had 5 band leaders in that orchestra. I had Claude Thornhill, Glenn Miller, Charlie Spivak, Pee Wee Irwin, Will Bradley, and, of course, well-known soloists like Bud Freeman, George Van Epps. We had a great deal of talent. It's rather extraordinary, really, that this band only lasted 2.5 years, because after that I went to the West, to Los Angeles, where, frankly, the real action was happening. So the band was short-lived, and in spite of the fact that it had a great deal of talent there, I had a much better band in the West. I was extremely proud of it. And the best proof you can have of being proud of a band is when they rehearse without you. I remember once in the Rose Room, I think it was, we got permission to work fairly late after the customers had gone. They turned out all the lights except a working light, took all the tablecloths off the tables and so forth, and left us to rehearse. And I had some trouble with the new arrangement I just made, and I was sitting at a table trying to sort out what had gone wrong somewhere. And I heard my reed section talking. And Jack, who was the leader, I heard him say, no, Pop says it should be, we should breathe at the end of 7.5 bars. You know, I said, no, we breathe at 6 bars, you know. He said, no, Pop said breathe at the end of 7.5 bars. And I thought, who the devil is this chap Pop who's telling everybody what to do? And then it dawned on me.
Well, Pops, in this time, you were still writing songs, were you?
Oh, yes, rather.
In our business, we say that the hit song is the perfect marriage of lyrics and music.
That's right.
And usually done by 2 people. Now, you have come up with songs, and you wrote not only the lyrics, but the music as well.
Yeah.
Now, how does this happen?
Yes. This is one of those things, isn't it? You know, I was a natural music writer, a tune writer. I'm not a natural lyric writer, but I learnt a certain amount. You don't really have to have a team. It is much better to have a team. Robin and Ranger, who wrote so many delightful songs, they were a team. They lived together and thought together. Now, mine is only, after all, let's say, something quite minor in comparison. But to learn to lyric write, I did a lot of work for it. I really looked at lyrics, and I began to clean up the carelessness that went on in the early days. You see, if you take a song like a great tune like My Blue Heaven, the lyric is not very much, because in those days you sold the tune, not the lyric. The lyric was simply something that if anybody wanted to sing it, they could, but most people played it. And then we came to the days when the vocalist was as important as the band, and then you had to have a lyric which was as good as the tune. I wonder sometimes whether I ever have achieved a marriage. I think possibly I did in the very thought of you. I've certainly got a couple of songs which are not published where there is the marriage, you know. But it is very seldom that you get it.
And now you're retired, Ray, is that true?
Yes, because, you know, the time passes and there's a period in which you do the things for that period. And I belong to that period. And for me to write a whole lot of songs now for another generation would make it extremely tough on me. It'd be an uphill fight.